Hello and welcome to this episode of Everything That You Wanted to Know About Self-Leadership, but were afraid to ask. Today I wanted to talk about liminal spaces. I wanted to talk about liminal spaces because I think it's a really interesting topic anyway, but also I believe there is something quite important to consider at this time of year. This time of year being, for many at least, the festive season. So what are liminal spaces? Well, there are physical and non-physical liminal spaces or places. Let me begin by talking about physical liminal places. A liminal place or space tends to be associated with transition, with a movement between two places. So a corridor could be a liminal place. A doorway, in fact, could be a liminal place. It's amazing how many children's games are associated with walking through a doorway or across a threshold. And when you cross that threshold, you're in a different world. Magical things can happen there. And another example of a liminal place space could be a car park, where we leave the office and we walk through the car park to get into that car to then get home. And these liminal spaces can be enjoyable. It can be enjoyable walking through a doorway, of course. It can be enjoyable walking down a corridor. It can be enjoyable, kind of, walking through a car park because we relish the thought of getting into the warm car and getting home. But those liminal places and spaces can also be a little bit disturbing, at times unsettling. Some corridors, particularly in hotels that are quite quiet, can feel just a little bit scary at times. And yes, I am thinking about The Shining. And those other places like doorways that I've mentioned, sometimes we can walk through a doorway and go, oh, I don't like it in here. I don't like the atmosphere here at all. This is quite creepy. What's going on? And other slightly disturbing liminal spaces can be the aforementioned car park, where we just think something's odd, it's not quite right, I don't feel quite settled here, my spider sense is tingling. Or it could be a disused building or a disused hospital, if you've ever been in one of those. And those can be unsettling on many different levels, but I think that the building itself in those situations can be liminal. It is in a stage of transition, and the transition, as often as not, is from between the building or the hospital being fully functional and yet not now, but also not being a ruin. You could probably, if you wanted to, if you dared, stay there for the night and be relatively well protected from the elements, but you probably wouldn't want to stay there. Just, old filing cabinets and pieces of machinery that are way out of date, and old newspapers. And those anachronisms can add to the state of unease that we can have in these liminal places and spaces. You may have seen on the internet photographs and mock-ups of the so-called backrooms, these corridors, these offices that just look odd, look peculiar. The colours are wrong, unsettling, garish, sometimes sort of sepia, washed out orange. And you get the impression that this place is stuck in time and you wouldn't want to go there. And if you ever did find yourself there, would you get out? And those physical places, as I've suggested, also tends to be about transition from one place to another. A bus station, a bus terminus at night, you're waiting to get the bus that will take you from where you are, and you walk to that point and you want to get that coach, that bus to where you want to get to. But if there's no one around, or there's only one or two people, that can also send the shivers up your spine. Or a mall which is deserted, a department store deserted. Somebody said to me recently that their liminal space is a supermarket which is empty, but they can be enjoyable. The coach station, well, maybe you can relax and savor the journey ahead of you, and so on. But I guess the point I'm making, I'm zoning in on, I'm focusing on deliberately those places and spaces and times, as we shall see, which can be a little bit disconcerting, because the liminal space and place can also be in our lives. It can be psychological, it can be experiential. Some people would argue that life itself is liminal. It's a transition between where we came from and where we go. And certainly in life, you'll be aware that there are times when, let's say maybe you came out of a relationship, and before you get into another relationship, you are, for the first time perhaps in a while, not in any kind of relationship whatsoever. And that can be really joyful. It can be liberating for a lot of folks. But it can also be strange. It can also be different. And I think the same thing can happen when we leave a job or lose a job, and before we get another job, or before we get bedded in and used to a new job. And we can also see those transitions in our lives when maybe someone departs. They're not around anymore for whatever reason. It can also be at various stages in our lives. Puberty, how mixed up is that for most people? Sometimes our 20s, because we're still finding out how the world really works, but we probably think we do know how it works, but we quite patently don't, particularly if we look back on our behaviours in years to come. And the reason I'm mentioning it now, as I've suggested, is because of the festive season, because the festive season itself for many people can be a liminal time, a liminal place, a liminal space, as we go from what was normal, kind of, in November to getting to the other end of it after the 1st of January. And I know a lot of people, they don't really pay attention. It's not their thing. But there are also many people who are aware of, who probably want to take part in at least some of the celebrations, but don't quite engage with it because it can be really challenging. It can be really challenging because these days, more and more people are a little bit short of money. There's a cost of living crisis. And on one hand, they're worried about how to pay the bills and then worried about how do I afford presents. And at the same time, on TV or online, they're being bombarded with these happy, smiling, laughing, apparently opulent and perfect images of Christmas and the New Year and holiday celebrations. And that contrast can be disturbing and upsetting for many folks. And I think we should bear that in mind. We should really bear that in mind, because as we look around and as we consider our own plans and hopes for that period, that holiday period, if that's your thing, then I think we should also pay attention to who may not be in the best frame of mind at that time of year. And if it's you, my advice would be to reach out, don't suffer in silence, and also to consider that in terms of the finances, a gift, a true gift, is time, it's your love, it's your attention, it's being with people. That is priceless, and we don't need physical gifts. That's just a push to get us to spend more money with company A, B, C, whatever. And also I would suggest during this season, if you find it challenging, to, if you possibly can, get outdoors, exercise, get as much quality sleep as you can, and look around for those things you can be grateful for, because there almost always are. And when you find them, and when you consider them, savor them mentally, be present, be mindful, be joyful about what you do have. And if you have people in your life, could be a pet as well. There's a lot of joy to be had with a cat, a dog, and so on. Savor that time. And in that sense, you can elongate the well-being that we can feel when we consider those things, those people. And in terms of the other stuff, well, always remember that, yeah, it can feel tough. It can be tough, of course. This too shall pass. There will be a back to normal in due course. And if you possibly can, find things to have a bit of a laugh at. Humour, as they say, is a great medicine. Some people say the best medicine. And laughter is a good thing to experience, preferably with other people, but certainly we can do that on our own. So where can you find fun? Because certainly right now, at this time of year, there's a lot of absurdity around. And I think there's a lot of things that I can laugh at. I can choose to be irritated with and annoyed about, but I, hopefully, most of the time, decide to find amusing. In the next episode, I'm going to talk more about the festive season and come at some of the challenges from a different angle entirely. Anyway, for the moment from me, bye for now.